Hi, welcome to Maker's Bar. I'm your host, Akshita Shetty. Today, we have Vikram Bharati, co founder of Draper Nation and global founder of Draper House. He's with us, and Vikram and I know each other for a long time now. We've been friends, we went to business school together, and I'm really, really excited to actually have Vikram and share his story because he's definitely inspired me over the years. So, Vikram, welcome to Maker's Bar. Looking forward to learning more about you and your journey and how you charted your territories, I would say. So, looking forward to learning everything about you today.
Hi, Aki. Thanks for inviting me to your awesome podcast. I'm looking forward to chatting with you. It's been a long time.
Yeah.
So, looking forward to catching up.
Yes, same here, same here. So, Vikram, tell me a little bit about your early career or your childhood. And I know you lived globally. So, and how did you get to doing what you're doing right now? I know a lot of it, but I would love to hear everything.
Yeah, sure. Well, I think it all starts, I suppose, with all of us at birth. And
Mhm.
so, I I was born in a place called Nagaland,
Yeah.
which is a state in the northeast of India.
Hmm.
And the reason why I'm starting there is because I think it's important in terms of the effect it's had in sort of what I do today.
Hmm.
My father was from Rajasthan, which is another state in a different part of the country, and my mother was from Nagaland.
Hmm.
And if you sort of Google Nagaland versus say Rajasthan, you'll see it's a very different, two very separate, different types of cultures.
Yeah.
And the reason I ended up being born there was because my father worked for the Indian government,
Hmm.
and his task at the time was to integrate Nagaland, which was a new state, into central India, which was
Wow.
the central body.
Hmm.
And when the British had left, they sort of, as they carved out pieces of
Different
land
parts of
all around the world,
Yeah.
and it caused a lot of chaos in all parts of the world
Yeah.
because uh, you were trying to integrate very different cultures
Yes.
together, and people usually don't like that. And so the case of Nagaland was the same. The culture in Nagaland is very different. The language is different. The religion is different. People look different.
Yeah.
Everything is different. And so trying to integrate a place like that to a completely different alien sort of culture to them was a very difficult task. And so growing up, I saw and experienced firsthand
Hmm.
um, the, the, the good, the bad, and ugly of physical territory, and how physical territory is usually a very cumbersome and difficult thing to do, and we all fight over physical territory. So that was my upbringing, just to see what it's like to be in that sort of situation.
Okay.
Fast forward, I ended up moving to California. That's where I spent most of my life.
Yeah.
Went to school there, worked there. That's where we met in
Yes.
business school at USC, when we were adults.
Yeah.
And my early career was in banking. I
Hmm.
worked at Morgan Chase for a very long time. And then at one point, about 10 years ago, I
Hmm.
took a different turn. I went traveling, backpacking around the world for about 2 years,
Yeah.
and traveled to, 50 plus, I think it was close to 60 countries.
Yeah.
Got to see the world. And then I ended up settling down in Singapore, where I live currently.
Uh-huh.
I have 3 children. I met my wife while I was traveling. And now, for the last 6, 7 years, I've been very immersed in building startup societies around the world. I run a fund. I invest in companies. And now my latest project is a moonshot project to build a new country on the internet.
Okay. Okay, that sounds very interesting. Building a new country on the internet. So, for those of you who don't know, Vikram was also a corporate person many years ago. When I knew Vikram, he would suit up every day to business school. So, anyways, so tell me, what is like the goal and mission of Draper Nation? What do you mean by this? And well, I mean, I don't understand what does creating nations on the internet mean technically. So I'm curious.
Well, come along for the ride because we're also really trying to figure it out. But maybe I can set the stage and the context and the thinking behind the idea.
Mm-hmm.
So the premise is the following. Today in 2024, there are around 200 countries.
Mm-hmm.
195 to be exact, and 197 because two are not recognized by the United Nations. But let's just say there's 200 countries today in 2024.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe a little trivia question for you, Aki, is how many countries do you think existed 50 years ago?
Maybe 100.
Okay, yeah. So I mean, close to that. And then if you go 50 years before that, so about 100 years ago, there were I think about 30, 40 countries.
Yeah, yeah.
And so in the span of 100 years, we've gone from 30, 40 countries to now 200 countries. And
Mm-hmm.
so the reason why I start with that is because I think it puts into perspective that countries as we know it today, this was not the status quo, in our parents' generation and the parents' generation before that.
Yeah.
Uh, Countries have always evolved and changed
Mm-hmm.
constantly over thousands of years. And
Mm-hmm.
the main underlying reason for that change has
Mm-hmm.
been technology. And
Okay.
so, before we had nation states or countries as we know it today, which is a modern concept, it was
Mm-hmm.
all tribes, it was all kingdoms, it was all, kings and lords and fiefdoms in Europe.
Yeah.
And in China, there was essentially one or two kingdoms and dynasties. Same
Yeah.
thing in India, there were essentially kingdoms and dynasties. And
Yeah.
so the idea of, countries and nations as we know it today only started a few hundred years ago,
Yeah.
and they have changed and evolved. And when we say they have changed and evolved in the past,
Mm.
uh, and because of technology. And so if you look at like once we figured out as humans how to sort of make
Organize.
fireplaces and create fire, we all started creating a different type of society.
Yeah.
And then when we figured out how to, make iron and ore, we had defense mechanism. When
Mm-hmm.
we figured out how to make ships, we could go out and conquer other territories. And so these are all technologies.
Yeah.
Uh, and so as technologies have evolved and changed, the way nations and countries and the amounts of nation and countries have always changed and evolved.
Mm-hmm.
So the thesis here is that in the future,
Mm-hmm.
nations and countries will change and evolve and look different
Mm-hmm.
because in the future there's going to be new technologies that we can't even sort of think of today.
Perceive. Yeah. Yeah. We can't even perceive right now. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's one premise.
Yeah.
The other premise is that in today's world, 80 or 90% of government services can be done digitally.
Mm-hmm.
And if you think about, what are the key roles of the government, right? So safety, security,
Mm-hmm.
legal structure, financing,
Mm-hmm.
titles, ownership rights, all of these things. These are purely digital. They can be delivered
Yeah.
digitally.
Yeah.
In fact, I would say that the most advanced, modern countries, about 90% of their work can be done digitally.
Mm-hmm.
So now you have these two premises where everything can be done digitally,
Mm-hmm.
and then nation states change and as technology evolves. The third premise, which sort of ties it all together, is that the world that we live in today is very different from our parents' world and
Mm-hmm.
their parents' world.
Yeah.
In today's world, you're born here, you probably work somewhere else, you're probably married to someone who's from a different part of the world. Your
Yeah.
children are probably born somewhere else. They probably have 2, 3 passports. And we are interconnected and working with people all around the world. So
Mm.
the last 30 years has changed our interconnectedness with everything and everyone
Mhm.
compared to, even 30, 40 years ago.
Yeah.
So we live in a very different world where everything is interconnected. And
Mhm.
so now you put these three things together, and the idea of saying, oh my God, is it possible to create a country that's completely digital without land or border, where
Mhm.
you can provide government services digitally?
Mhm.
uh, then it becomes a little bit more like, oh, maybe that is possible. So that's a question that I think is a fundamental question, and we're trying to explore that to see whether or not we
Mhm.
can build a digital country
Yeah.
and create a new type of nation.
Okay. Got it. So, so tell me, like, as what is like the product line when you say it's a, uh, I mean, you're creating a digital nation. Like, what are you giving as as a product line? What are you?
Sure,
I mean, yeah.
sure. Uh, so one thing to keep in mind, Aki, is that most of the people in the world, when I
Yeah.
say most, I mean more than half of
Uh-huh.
the world's population
Yeah.
currently receives nothing from their governments.
Yeah.
They get nothing, right? So if you and I are, you and I are the privileged ones. We
Mhm.
live and work in modern countries where the governments that we reside in provide something of value to us, right?
Mhm.
Safety, security, identity, that's valuable. Most people in the world are arbitrarily born into a country,
Mhm.
and that government provides them with a cultural identity, right? A language,
Mhm.
a history. But in
Mhm.
terms of tangible things like healthcare, safety, security, legal rights, property rights, uh,
Mhm.
most people in the world don't receive any of that in today's world. So when the reason why I answer with that is to say the baseline of starting in what do we provide to people is actually very low, because most people in the world don't receive anything. No
Mhm.
healthcare, no education, no safety, no pensions, right? So I think that's half the world today.
Mhm.
And that's actually kind of mind-boggling to think about, because if we can create a digital country that provides just very basic government services, let's say we provide telehealth as a
Yeah.
service, right? Most people in the world don't have telehealth, right?
Yeah.
And so I think we can provide government services such as telehealth, insurance, pension. All of these things can be done digitally. So these are government services that we can provide,
Mhm.
just like a normal government. So that's one.
Mhm.
Secondly, I think where we're going to really have some wins is that if we can create trade agreements and treaties with physical countries to
Mhm.
provide things like mobility, and provide services that are very physical in nature.
Mhm.
So if you think about how countries operate today, it's all based on trade agreements, right?
Yeah.
If you're a small country, you shake hands with other countries and you provide services to each other.
Mhm.
And so there's no reason why a digital country can't do treaties and trade agreements with physical countries.
Yes.
So that's one of the things that we want to do. Now, by the way, all of these things are in the future. We're just getting started. We're 3 months old, and so
Yeah.
a lot of stuff is conceptual for the future. But I
Yeah.
think the low hanging fruit is if we can start giving people government services digitally, things
Mhm.
like healthcare, insurance, pension, credit, and then navigate that to the next step, which we create bilateral agreements with and trade agreements with physical countries and provide things like mobility. Then
Mhm.
already we're providing way more than most countries provide. So that's one thing.
Mhm.
The second thing I think, in terms of what is the product line and how do we make people's lives better,
Mhm.
is I, what is the question is what is the economic engine? Because a country is only as good as its economic power, right?
Mhm.
And so I think our thing that we want to focus on is figuring out the economic engine, which I think is going to be our sovereign wealth fund. So as you know, there are a few countries in the world that have very successful sovereign wealth funds. So
Yes.
Singapore has Temasek,
Mm-hmm.
Norway has a very good sovereign wealth fund, and there are only a handful of countries who actually have a sovereign wealth fund.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think we can create an on-chain sovereign wealth fund where
Mm-hmm.
every citizen has a stake in. And
Mm-hmm.
this sovereign wealth fund is transparent. Everyone can see what it's doing because it's on-chain. And we make investments into real world assets. We make investments into companies. We make investments into real estate, etc. And this will be a sovereign wealth fund,
Mm-hmm.
and every citizen of this, every passport holder will have a stake in the sovereign wealth fund. And if the sovereign wealth fund does really well, then the
Mm-hmm.
citizens of the digital country will do well. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that starts a whole economic engine, which most countries don't even have.
So, what kind of currency will this online nation be trading on? Would it have its own currency, or would there be some kind of adoption with a particular currency, or how would that kind of work as you run the sovereign wealth fund and everything?
Yeah. So our plan is that, first of all, this digital country is going to be on the new rails. It's
Yeah.
completely going to be on the new money rails. It's going to be on the new technology stack. So it's going to be blockchain based, and it's going to be a crypto based economy.
Mm-hmm.
It has to. If it ends up being on the old rails and the limitations are too high.
Yeah.
So in terms of us, the currency we're going to have, we are already in the process of launching our own.
Mm-hmm.
We're calling it a citizen token.
Mm-hmm.
And this citizen token is going to be based on participation. So right now we have a beta product on the market where you can get a passport and you can increase your trust score
Mm-hmm.
by verifying through different mechanisms. And the higher trust score you have,
Uh-huh.
um, you will get access to these citizen tokens,
Uh-huh.
and that will give you participation. So the whole idea here is that we want everyone who's part of this to participate.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone can join, but the more you participate, the higher your scores increase, and the more stake you have in the public good.
Super.
So
What kind of blockchain is the citizens token on? Just out of curiosity.
we haven't picked the chain, to be honest. We're still working on figuring out, and in conversations with all the chains out there.
Mm-hmm.
And we're still figuring out which one to launch this on.
Mm-hmm.
But if you have any ideas, let us know.
I don't have ideas right now. Maybe offline.
Right. Right.
Yeah. So this is kind of really interesting. So as you're explaining to me, I've been in new tech all my like I've dabbled around with new tech, right? And I do this podcast, but how are you explaining this to people? Like, I know it's 3 months old. How are you getting your early adoption as you are speaking to people? Because this the way you spoke, I felt like I'm talking to Naval or you are or something like that, where you're talking like almost like a philosopher and so futuristic, right? And I can probably understand because I'm probably at the same we've had similar experiences, but it's very hard for people to adopt to something like this, right? Unless you grew up in an age of all digital. And even for those kids, I don't know if it's easy for them to understand. So how you going about explaining this to
Yeah.
your customers? Yeah.
So we come across so far two groups of people
Hmm.
who when we talk to, there's generally two groups of people and two sets of reactions.
Yeah.
90% or 80% of the people are like, "Oh, this is crazy! You're out of your mind. This is never going to work." You
Yeah.
know, countries have guns and ships, and they're thousands of years old, and they have a history, and there's no way you can replace that. You guys are nuts. Right? So that's majority of the people. We have that reaction.
Yeah.
The second set of people that have who have a reaction are people go, "Oh, that's interesting. That sounds
Yeah.
kind of cool. I don't really understand it, but it sounds very interesting, and I want to be part of it."
Yeah.
Now that's a small group of people.
Yeah.
And it's actually very interesting to kind of see this reaction, because I completely understand the 90% of the people who have that reaction of, this is stupid, this is a bad idea, don't even like, why are you wasting your time on this?
Yeah.
I really like that, because I think if we didn't have that, it would mean we're doing something that's very easy to do, and something that's like probably going to, it's not new, right? Like
Yes. Yeah.
it will be an old idea. And so I love getting that reaction of, I don't understand, I don't get it, this is crazy.
Yeah.
Uh, but the 10% of the people who go, oh, this is actually very interesting, they're the ones that we want to focus on, because they're the early adopters. They're the ones who are open to crazy ideas, who are
Mhm.
open to this new concept, and who are sort of open to experimenting, right? And so we usually say, okay, let's focus on that 10%,
Mhm.
because they're the early adopters. And I think if you look at how every technology grows, it's always early adopters who want to experiment, and they're the ones who then help us build products, and then it grows and grows and becomes more mainstream. So I would say most people think this is a really bad idea and it's never going to work. And I think that's good. We have very strong confidence in this idea for the following reason. Even if we succeed 5 to 10% on this crazy project,
Mhm.
it really changes the game, because it fundamentally
Mhm.
changes the question, or asks the question from people on, hey, in a completely digital connected world, what does it mean to be a citizen of a country?
Yeah.
What does it mean to be a country in a completely digital world,
Mhm.
where people are not constrained to a physical border? People
Yeah.
are interacting and working and trading with everyone and everything in the world. What does it mean to be a sovereign country in that sense? Does it mean a sovereign country is then fully only defined by a physical border,
Mhm.
right? If that's your definition of a country, then then like that's sounds pretty constrained, right? So uh, and then it's also very interesting, Aki, talking to smaller countries, like
Yes.
small island nations,
Yeah.
who are going underwater, and they're thinking about their future and their
Yes.
their cultural preserving their culture.
Yeah.
They're the ones who are actually very open to this idea, because they're like, hey, look, my little island nation is about
Yeah.
to go underwater in the next 50 years. What happens after that,
Then.
right?
Yeah. Yeah. Mhm. Sorry.
Oh yeah. So I was just saying, I think your question was like, what are the reactions we're getting?
Yes.
And I think we're getting we're I those who understand it, they're the ones that we want to work with.
Mhm.
And I think this will take a long time. Of course, this is not something that's going to happen overnight.
Yeah. So, so I definitely think it's really cool. By the way, I am a full proponent of such ideas. And I think Ethiopia, not Ethiopia. What is a small nation? I'm forgetting now. It is not Ethiopia. Remember we spoke about it when I was in Singapore, where you could just get an e-passport or something like that, or e-green card.
Oh, Estonia.
Estonia. So Estonia, I think, tried to do something similar, but not. But but I think Vikram, I have one question. Like, what about natural resources, right? Um, if we look at the reasons why we have sovereign nations and borders in the last 50 years, I mean, it was after the Second World War, right? But what about because we are protecting natural resources with massive industrial military complexes across the world, right? Not just the United States, but everywhere. So, what do you think about that? Like, if you
Sure.
have, I mean,
Yeah. Well, by the way, just going back just on your comment on Estonia. So,
yeah.
by the way, we have a startup house in Estonia, in Tallinn.
Hmm.
We've been engaging with the Estonian government for a very long time. I'm an e-resident. In fact, Tim Draper, who's sort of like the figurehead of this entire Draper, he was the first e-resident or second e-resident of Estonia.
Yeah.
And in fact, Skype came out of Estonia,
Hmm.
and the Draper ecosystem was the first investor into Skype.
Uh-huh.
And so we have a very good relationship with Estonia. And I'm a very happy e-resident of Estonia.
Mm-hmm.
So Estonia has been a leader in building this, in starting this concept of like e-residency or e-government services. They've been the trailblazers, and they've been the people who kind of leading this.
Yeah.
Though I think the reason why I think Draper Nation is very different is because Estonia is very limited in terms of what they can do with e-services. The reason is Estonia is part of the EU. They
Mm-hmm.
are part of NATO, and in terms of they're very constrained and restricted in terms of what they can do because they're part of a much larger political
Yeah.
system, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So the e-residency, they provide government services to anyone. That's great, but
Yeah.
they can't go out and build a new country, right? And
Yes.
because they're part of a much older system.
Mm-hmm.
But I think with Draper Nation, we're saying, look, we're going to create a whole new sovereign digital country
Mm-hmm.
that anyone can become a citizen of, right? And not just providing government services to people, but
Mm-hmm.
creating a new country. So it's very different. We're taking a next step, from Estonian e-residency.
Yeah.
And coming back to sort of your question on natural resources, uh, for me, it's a very simple thing.
Mm-hmm.
There are if you think about a lot of the advanced countries in the world, they
Mm-hmm.
don't have natural resources.
Yeah.
And I'll give you an example. I live in Singapore, right? Singapore is a tiny island
Mm-hmm.
uh, country with
Mm-hmm.
one of the highest GDP per capita in the world,
Yeah.
with one of the highest literacy rates in the world. And
Yes.
Singapore has no natural resources,
Okay.
like zero.
Mm-hmm.
But they're able to trade with other countries. They're able to create value
Mm-hmm.
that people want. They're able to create intellectual capabilities, which other people want. They're able to create a legal system and a framework where everybody wants to establish their companies in, which
Mm-hmm.
is very valuable. So
Yeah.
I almost feel that actually having no natural resources gives you an advantage,
Mm-hmm.
because the new natural resource of the future is not going to be timber and oil, and oil and ore.
Mm-hmm.
It's actually going to be intellectual uh, uh,
Data.
resource.
Yeah, I hear you. So, so, so Vikram, so as you're rolling out this, and I definitely love the idea of having your own sovereign fund, and people are paying into the sovereign fund, and then they are getting government services, right? And across the world, I totally hear you. There are only few countries where you have good government services, and this sounds like obviously out there, but it's something that's required as well. I truly believe in that, right? So, so tell me, like, as you're building this, right? This is like foundational. Like you're talking about a problem which people have contemplated over 1,000 years, literally, just with a lot of technology now, right? And what are like the key values or um, like that that you want Draper Nation to represent, or that you're contemplating within your team? Because this is something where I think the morality needs to be at like the highest of order, right? Because we're thinking about creating an e-nation, right? So yeah.
Yeah. So our tagline is break barriers,
Yeah.
live borderless, and be
Uh-huh.
free. That's those are the three key things. For
Uh-huh.
us, the most important thing is freedom. Uh,
Mhm.
we think that if you allow humans to be free, then
Mhm.
the world becomes a better place. So live borderless, break barriers, be free. That's our tagline, and I think it's a good tagline. But I think it the underlying principle is freedom. Now, if you uh, if you become a citizen of Draper Nation, you have to take the nation pledge,
Okay.
and the nation pledge is very simple, but
Hmm.
that's our key values.
Okay.
And I mean, maybe I'll quickly go through it. It'll take like 10 seconds.
Okay.
So
Okay. Sure.
I
Yeah.
will promote freedom at all costs.
Yeah.
I will do everything in my power to drive, build, and pursue progress and change.
Yeah.
My brand, my network, and my reputation are paramount.
Yeah.
I will set positive examples for others to emulate. I
Mm-hmm.
will instill good habits in myself. I will take care of myself. I will fail and fail again until I succeed.
Mm-hmm.
I will explore the world with gusto and enthusiasm. I
Yeah.
will treat people well. I will
Uh-huh.
make short term sacrifices for long term success.
Uh-huh.
I will pursue fairness, openness, health, and fun with all that I encounter, mostly fun. I
Uh-huh.
will keep my word. I
Uh-huh.
will try my best to make reparations for my digressions. So these are like our key values and key things that this is our national pledge.
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
to become a citizen of the country, you have to agree to this pledge.
yeah.
And now, as you can see, this pledge is very basic, but it's very profound
Mhm.
because it's simple, but yet very difficult to do.
So Vikram, I have to take a slightly side story here. So since at the beginning when we were talking, and I said I went to Aspen Institute, and I did a leadership and a good society program there. And all we did over a period of 10 days was contemplate different philosophers and leadership styles across thousands of years. And I never in my the wildest of dreams thought like I will have this interview someday, 1 year from then, and talk to my good friend and where he's writing a pledge of a nation. Like I never thought about that. So and we contemplated for almost 10 days and we could not come up with what is a good society. We talked about different good society slash good nation. We talked about democracy, we talked about communism, we talked about a combination of both and everything, and it was a very hard thing. But as you rightly pointed out, now there's a lot of technology and you can actually live border free if the nations around the world decide to do this, right? And
Yeah.
hopefully we will not be fighting for more borders as we are right now in the world. But okay, so tell me, I see this thing in news now a lot across, since we are in a year where we have elections, right? I talk about people are talking about central bank digital currencies, right? And forget all the things that's going on YouTube or anything, but I personally feel like the governments around the world, and it's not like I personally feel, I have read data. Yeah, it's not personal feeling. I've read data. Like governments around the world are looking at central bank digital currencies, and they are trying to become more digital in a way, right? So, as you're building Draper Nation, when you look at this, what do you think? Like, I am curious because you probably are thinking about this a lot more than I am now. So, what are your thoughts when you see something like that?
Yeah, well, I think the CBDC conversation is a very interesting one, and in fact, we can see it working in some countries, right? Like China has rolled out the
Yeah,
CBDC
yeah,
already,
yeah. India's
um,
doing that too. I was very
and India's right. India's thinking about it too as well.
yeah,
So, actually, let me go back a little bit and maybe make a comment on some of the stuff that you said.
yeah,
So, I have always observed that there are two types of companies, or
mm-hmm.
two types of conversations, or two types of ideas.
Yeah,
Um, either you're talking about the problem,
yeah,
or you're presenting a solution. And
mm-hmm.
usually things fall into these two categories, right? You go to a dinner table and we're all complaining about the wars in the world, and these are
Right.
all problems. It's
Yes.
obvious. We're like, we
Yeah.
know there's wars happening, right? So I think 99% of our conversations in
Mm.
society and ideas in society are generally stating the obvious, which
Yeah.
is the problems.
Yeah.
It's very rare that someone says, "Hey, I have a solution,"
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
And so this idea of Draper Nation or digital country, I think falls into the solution category, right?
Mm-hmm.
We
Mm-hmm.
look at all the border disputes and all the wars happening today in Russia and in Gaza and Palestine and Israel, like all over the world, right? There's like conflicts happening over borders, right?
Yeah.
And we sit around and we talk about it, but we usually always state the obvious, which is all the problems. I
Mm-hmm.
think the solution is not maybe the two-state solution, right? Maybe
Mm-hmm.
the solution is creating a new type of country that
Mm-hmm.
is not bound by finite physical space, but
Mm-hmm.
an infinite digital space. Maybe that
Yes.
is the solution. And generally, I kind of have observed that the solutions are usually very, very crazy.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's better that we present solutions to the world than stating the obvious, which are generally
Yeah.
all the problems in the world. So I kind of feel like this idea of a digital country is very profoundly it's very profound because it is it falls in the solution category, and I usually never kind of hear people stating solutions. It's usually a shade of gray
Yeah.
different from someone else,
Exactly.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I don't think you can change the problem by providing a solution that's just a shade of gray different. I
Yeah.
think it needs to be completely different. So that's sort of like one thing. And the other thing, as you know, because you're a technologist, is that what technology does, it creates a lot more
Mm-hmm.
abundance than scarcity, right? So I think when we operate in a world where we're completely bound by physical space,
Yeah.
then that's very finite. But I think creating in the digital space creates infinite abundance. And so I think anyways, I just wanted to touch on that in terms of like the
Yeah.
possibility.
Yeah.
And then sort of come back to your question. Actually, I forgot your question. Sorry.
No, I was saying, what do you think about digital currencies or central bank digital currencies as you're thinking about designing nations online, right?
I
Which
see. I
which
see what
is
you mean.
like very utopic. I mean, if you spoke about CBDCs maybe 3 years ago, it was very utopic. And now, like two countries that I know have rolled out, right? And I don't know how many because I'm not tracking it on top of my head. And now it's like, okay, yeah, yeah, there's going to be digital currencies.
Yeah.
It's just the way it is, right? Because you want transactions to be efficient and be done within a single second, right? Because we have the technology to do that now. So as you look at that, you're talking about seven digital nations. What are your thoughts, right? Because
Yeah.
yeah.
So I well, to be honest, I have not formed my complete opinion on CBDCs because I'm still thinking, learning, and observing it.
Hmm.
So I think I have some fundamental value differences
Hmm.
from CBDCs, and
Yes.
I think CBDCs are antithetically the opposite of what I believe in and what I want to do in life.
Hmm.
And this digital country we're creating is all about freedom, and it's all about decentralization, and it's all about giving power to the individual.
Hmm.
And one thing is very clear from watching history is we've seen it repeat many times. And the underlining theme that is very obvious is that the more you try to centralize power, the more the more the individual loses out and becomes a pyramid where people at the top win because
Hmm.
they control the power, and people on the bottom lose because they lose power. And so I think the idea of giving money power to a centralized authority,
Hmm.
I just think that's fundamentally a terrible way to build a building
Okay.
because the infrastructure clearly means, oh, what? You mean the money is going to be controlled by three
Mhm.
people,
Yeah.
right? I mean,
It's-
so
yeah.
I kind of feel like fundamentally the architecture of the society seems that's not good architecture because it's
Mhm.
the central power of failure is it's
Mhm.
basically a few people,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that doesn't kind of make sense to me.
Yeah. So I, very similar to you. I had some libertarian views a few years ago, and I personally feel like in the last 50 years. I mean, I can't speak for like the last 1,000 years because it was not a really good and a kind history. But I mean, except what is happening in the last 1 year, which I'm not very happy about, but 1 or 2 years rather. But I think the last 50 years, it was not that bad after the Second World War. At least we had formed some way to organize, and it was doable, kind of a thing, right? But now we are at like um, I would say we are at a divergent point where there is technology, which is which which can give us like a massive head start, right? Obviously, how we implement this technology, how this adoption is a whole different matter. But we are at a we are at a step change because of technology, right? In the last 3-4 years, kind of a thing. And COVID was another accelerator that put us in the step change, right? So I definitely think like e-nations are like awesome from a conceptual point of view. And if you are living in a country where the government is not providing services, and if you know how to like buy into a service, into an e-nation service, I would love to do that, right? So I mean, I'm fortunate sitting here in the US. But if, say, for instance, I am in a country where, like you talked about those island countries where, in 50 years they would not be there, what do I do? Right. So totally hear you when you say that. Uh, so now I want to change a little bit and talk a little bit about you as an entrepreneur. First of all, you have inspired me a lot. I have to say, even today, this was like really inspirational. Um, I mean, I don't want to choose my favorites in my class, but there are two people who have inspired me a lot. It's you and Ian. Like, I have to say, like, both you guys have like kept me at check every time I look at Vikram, every time I look at Ian, and I'm like, oh my god, I'm not doing well for myself. So let's. I mean, I know you personally, but I just want to. I feel like some personal questions define an entrepreneur because I feel when you're working on problems like this, it's a definition of how you became what you became. And I also believe like you have to be at the intersection of crazy and genius. Only then then you can come up with Draper Nation, I would say. So tell me, like, how do you, like, how, I'm sure you've had a lot of failures and you've spoken about to me in private, but I mean, what was that one failure that you thought was like you it, it was like the biggest lesson of your life? For me personally, like, all my failures have been my biggest lessons of my life. I think of my failures more than my successes. I don't think of my successes at all. So
Yeah. So I guess, well, thank you for the kind words. Okay, I appreciate it. So I
yeah.
guess the question is, like, how do I see failures versus success?
Yeah.
Um, I have a slightly different sort of uh, take and observation on failure versus success, because I think the status quo, which is correct, is that the failures are the ones that teach you, et cetera, et cetera. So I agree with all of that. And I've had clearly uh, my share of failures, et cetera. But I think what I have learned over the last 6-7 years specifically
Mm-hmm.
is that I actually look at failure very differently, and I actually don't think there is anything such as failure.
Mm-hmm.
And especially in like in entrepreneurship, in terms of like when you're out there trying to build a company or trying to build an organization, I almost kind of see is like, what is the failure? Like, what if it didn't work? It didn't work, and
Yeah.
is that a failure or not? Right? I kind of almost see failure to be um, like non-existent, because I mean, we're all just gonna die and be under the grave anyways, right? So like, what is the failure? Like,
Yes.
what do we mean by failure? And I
Yes.
think okay, let's say we live in the startup world, right? So let's say you go out and you have this crazy idea and you raise $10 million and it didn't work,
Yep.
and you lost the $10 million because your idea just didn't work, and you burnt the money, and it just kind of disappeared, and you have to start from scratch again.
Yep.
Well, I don't really see that as a failure, honestly,
Mm-hmm.
uh, because it may be a failure in someone's mind compared to something else, but
Yeah.
I don't see that as a failure at all. I just kind of feel like that's basically what happens, and
Yes.
that happens more often than the successes. So in short, I don't even kind of think of failure as a thing. I just don't think it even exists, to be honest.
Yeah. I wish I got to your state of nirvana. I would say. I haven't reached there yet after all my meditation. So, anyways, uh, tell me, you obviously made a very bold statement. I don't look at failure as a failure, right? So that's very bold. So how do you approach risk, like, as you're looking at life and as you're building companies and everything? Like, how do you like approach risk in your business or in anything for that matter?
Well, I think for me, risk is really more like a person, like in my personal life. I don't see risk in my professional life or in like a business life. I actually don't even think too much about that, because for me, risk is very basic things. Like I don't want to, like, I love my family, I
Yeah,
love my kids, I love my wife,
yeah,
and if I lose that, for
yeah,
me that is the ultimate failure. That's failure. Like,
yeah.
everything else doesn't really honestly matter to me.
Mhm.
I don't see that as a risk or failure at all.
Uh-huh.
For me, it's more like the personal things. It's my friend, it's my health, it's my children, it's my wife. It's the things that are the closest to me, the
Yeah,
things that I experience day to day.
yeah.
So if I had a catastrophic, like, health issue because of my own
Yes.
doing, I'm
Yeah,
not sleeping well, I'm not eating well, I'm not exercising. Well, I think that's failure to me, because it's something that I can
yeah,
control.
yeah.
Um, if I if I don't spend time with my children, my children start hating me, I think that's failure, because it's something that I can actually control, and these are the things that are closest to me.
Yeah,
Or if I don't have a good relationship with my wife
yeah,
because of something that I do, then that's failure. So for me, failure and risk is actually very much just for things that are closest to me.
yeah.
It's my
Yes,
relationship with my siblings. I
yes,
I fortunately have very good relationship with my siblings.
yeah,
It never, like, I've had ups and downs with my siblings, but
yes,
now that we're older, we're like, hey guys, like, let's come on, let's all get along, right? And I have a lot
yes,
of siblings,
yeah,
so getting along with my siblings, with my family, with my children, with my friends, for me, these are the things that are important. Everything else, honestly, is not that important to
yeah, yeah, yeah. I like that. For me, I would say the things that are closest to me, I hold them very, very close. In fact, I'm a very private person about it as well. I don't put it on any kind of display. So, so obviously you've done many things now, and like I would say achieved quite a bit for class of 2014. So tell me, like, what your leadership style is as you look at new companies, as you look at building new companies, and um, obviously projects as well. Like, how do you approach it from a leadership point of view?
me.
Yeah,
My leadership style that I have noticed over the last 6 or 7 years
yeah,
is that I I like to find good people and give them the autonomy to do
hmm,
their mistakes.
yeah,
And so, like, with the startup houses, we're all around the world. We have about 20 startup houses, all, in every, like, all kinds of interesting countries. And,
yeah,
we were in 30 countries, and now we're in 15 countries. So it's changed. Like, we've gone into very, interesting markets, and experimented in, very, very conflict zones, and extremely emerging economies.
yeah,
And we failed in a lot of them. Like, things didn't work out, we lost all our money, people went to jail, like, all kinds of stuff has happened, right?
yeah,
But I still feel that the reason why the ones that have worked is because you basically try to find the best people that you can, and you
yeah.
just let them, you give them the power, and you give them the authority and the autonomy
Yeah,
to make their mistakes.
yeah,
And you let them just make mistakes, because if they don't make the mistakes, then it's just not, we're not building rocket ships to the moon, right? So so mistakes there are very different than the mistakes, on
yeah, yeah, yeah.
here.
No,
So
but even a niche, creating a niche, I think you cannot make mistakes there.
well, that's yeah, that's true. But I think ultimately finding good people and giving them the autonomy, I
Yes,
think, is
yes.
my leadership style, and it's the one that is just comes naturally to me, and it's the one that I think I need to hone and make better,
Hmm.
um, because I find that to be something that I like to do, and it's something that I've noticed that not a lot of people can do.
Hmm. Yeah,
But for me, that is the natural, I think, my superpower, and it's the one that I should lean into and
yeah,
and make better.
yeah. So, is there a book or a mentor or an event that significantly influenced your journey? And I mean, from what I know, I think the 2 years that you took after after business school like changed you quite a bit? Like you came back as a very different human being, but is there anything else that has influenced you deeply? Uh, you know?
Well, the one book and the one person that has for sure made the most impact in my life, and this is a person that I have never met,
Yeah,
is Eckhart Tolle,
yeah,
and his book The Power of Now. That is fundamentally the one book that I always give to people and recommend to people.
hmm,
That is the book that has had the most impact in my life.
yeah,
And that individual, when I listen to him, and he's my mentor. I've never met him, but I
definitely.
love his teachings and I love his energy. And when I've had some very rough moments in the past,
Mhm.
I, listening to him, reading his book has elevated me and gotten me out of very difficult
Yes,
situations.
yeah.
And so I would say that by far he's my number one mentor, and his book is my number one book that I
I've
have
read
read.
him, and I would recommend that you should go and meet him whenever you get a chance because you never know. Life's too short. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean,
Yes.
I have read so Ramdas over the years, and I've read many philosophers over the years now, um, and I wish like that he had a thing in Hawaii a few years ago before his death, and I wish. I mean, I wanted to go and I couldn't go, and then the very next year there was no more. So I would definitely recommend if Eckhart inspires you, you should definitely see him once in your lifetime. Uh,
Mm.
so so, you've been an entrepreneur for almost at this point a decade, and so I'm curious what advice or critical skills that you think an entrepreneur needs to have before he or she is starting their company. And
Yeah.
this is your last question.
Yeah. Thank you. I actually love this question
Yeah,
because I'm in an environment where I'm just surrounded by people who want to build things, right?
yeah,
From like college students to high school students, all the way to corporates, right? People want to start a company, want to build something.
yeah.
So that's my world. I'm surrounded by that every single day, and people always ask me, "Can you recommend some books to me?"
Hmm.
And I would say my answer to this has changed over the years, and where what I feel strongly now is you shouldn't read any books.
No.
You should not actually. You should not. If you start to think that you need to go read a book to become an entrepreneur, then you're on the wrong way. You should not read any books to inspire you. I think what you should do is just do things, take action. In fact, I always tell people you should just go write your own book,
Yeah,
because that's the spirit of entrepreneurship, is not to go and read 10 books to get inspired, is to
yeah,
actually go out and do things so you can write a book.
yeah,
And so my advice to would be, maybe for this podcast as well, is uh, don't look to books,
yeah.
but look to yourself to go do things to write a book.
Only in action there is something, right?
That's right.
Perfect. So it was great talking to you. And I have to say that you again inspired me. Now I have to work hard. So, every time I meet you and Ian, I'm like, oh God, you guys like inspire me so much. And I have to go work hard and, like prove myself and be like worthy of class of 2014. But, and thank you for coming on Makers Bar. I feel very happy when if my classmates come to Makers Bar. I'm always proud because I feel like, okay, wow, like we went to school together, and this is what we have all achieved, kind of a thing. So it's like a really proud moment for me. So thank you for coming, and thank you for discussing your vision on Draper Nation. As it's fantastic. It has opened my eyes, and I loved talking to you and just catching up with you over I mean, about yours and all your work as well. So thank you for coming on Makers Bar. It was a pleasure.
Thank you for having me. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah. All right.